Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Friendly Neighborhood Comic Book Vault. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And today Dan and I are going to review Good Spider-Man.
Yes.
Today,
this is some of my favorite Spider-Man stuff.
Today we're going to review the first arc of John Romita Jr. and J. Michael Straczynski's Amazing Spider-Man. We're going to be reviewing 30 to 35. And this is the stuff with Morlun, who is a villain that kind of comes out of nowhere, and you're like, who's that guy? And then it ends with me going, wow, that guy was really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Morlun is actually one of my favorite modern Spider-Man villain creations. And it's really interesting because he's sort of a force of nature and doesn't really talk too much, even though he's really compelling and interesting. It's just a credit to how tight and well-written I think this book is as a whole. The JMS is able to make an interesting villain out of a guy who basically doesn't talk most of the time.
So, Eric was kind enough to send me this first big volume of the Ultimate Collection of JMS, and I've never read this stuff, so this kind of like the Thor that you and I are doing right now, the Simonson stuff, I'm kind of getting a chance to go back and read the stuff for the first time and review it. And people have been telling me forever that, you know, JMS's run on Spider-Man was really, really, really good. And I agree. I thought this was really great stuff. It took me a couple issues to really get into it because I kind of wasn't sure where he was going with some of this stuff. But at the same time, it was intriguing all the way through. JMS, I think, does a really good job of subverting your expectations. I think that he's, and maybe this is just me, but I think that he's kind of like pushing you into a direction at the beginning in that first issue where you're supposed to think that Ezekiel is somehow like another version of Peter Parker.
Yeah, I definitely got that too. I think he may not be a version of Peter Parker in continuity, but I thought he was very obviously supposed to be JMS's riff on an older Peter Parker.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and then there's all that talk about how he has a lot in common with Uncle Ben, and I felt like Romita kind of drew him like Uncle Ben in the face a little bit.
Yeah, he did. The hair especially, too, with the long sideburns and the gray. The way Uncle Ben's hair is styled is very distinct in the old Ditko issues, and he definitely had that going on.
But yeah, I do think that even literally at first you're supposed to think maybe, or at least I did for a minute, that maybe this is like you know, Peter Parker from the future, or yet dear God, I hope not, another clone, that kind of thing. And then it turns out not only that it's not that, but this really intriguing kind of thing where, well, hey, if you think about the world we live in where people get superpowers, you're not going to be the only one that's got spider powers.
Right, exactly. And the thing that I found really interesting about this book, sort of the mission statement of it was, and what I really appreciated about it, because we have an adult Peter Parker here, and everybody at Marvel today working there says, you can't tell interesting stories with an older or adult Peter Parker. And I think this story begs to differ, and I think that's sort of the point of the story, is we had Peter Parker come of age, we know who he is, he knows who he is. Where else do you go with the character? Because basically this is a story about a guy that's trying to find out who he is. So you ask, who is Spider-Man? You ask who the other persona is. That's the point of this, I think, is asking what sort of role Spider-Man has to play in Peter Parker's world instead of being a vice versa type thing. And we kind of get a message here towards the end when we have Ezekiel, taking the responsible path that Peter does. He gets inspired by him and does that. It's sort of JMS saying, like, it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what sort of past you have, you can be Spider-Man and have it work, and have it be something that anybody can be. And I thought that was great, because it's one of the ideas that Stan Lee always talked about with Spider-Man is he can be anybody under the mask. He doesn't have to be a kid, he doesn't have to be a teenager, he can be anybody.
Yeah, and the big reason for that is because the message of Spider-Man is an endearing thing that permeates the ages. Everybody has to learn that lesson of responsibility. As cliche as we might think it is an important thing, and I think that it's a message that you can keep, if not hammering constantly in the backdrop. And I don't feel like, by the way, this story hammers the responsibility message too hard. I feel like that's just a component of it. What I really latched onto was the idea that JMS is going to take the adult Peter Parker and show that we can tell more interesting stories with him by still taking him back to high school.
JMS systematically put Peter Parker in every situation that he hasn't been in that makes his life difficult. Because before this, I don't think we necessarily had a fully grown-up Peter Parker. It was sort of a guy that was grown up that was still acting like the Peter Parker back when he was a kid. And I think here, when he's getting this job at the school and he's seeing how much different kids are today than he was, and trying to relate to them and teach them things, it's a really interesting sort of look at him as a person, how he was brought up, because that's one of the things that Slott had played with a lot in his run. Like, the reason Spider-Man is so special is because of the way he was raised by Aunt May and Uncle Ben, and that point's sort of here too, but it's used as a device to sort of inform all of the other challenges that Peter has in the book. Everything from Morlun to the way he got his powers, the way he interacts with Ezekiel, everything here is sort of informed by his ideals and sort of how naive he is. This is very much a wake-up call for him, and seeing how much bigger the world around him is than he initially had thought.
That's just what I was going to say. Yeah, he's got to learn here in all of these different facets that, like you said, the world is bigger than he is, and that things aren't as easy as he'd like them to be. And I think that one of the moments that really drives that home is when he goes to the high school that first time, and even after that, and he's trying to help out that kid that's being bullied, and there's almost this kind of like this kind of irritation with like adult figures and mentors and teachers with how come you didn't step in and save me when that happened to me. And he's finding that it's just more complicated than that, because he's learning from this other teacher that you just can't always do that, because you step in and those kids are going to bully that other kid even harder than they did before. And then there's this idea that school has kind of gotten worse since Peter Parker went there, and that things are even kind of like more volatile than they were before. And so part of Peter's answer to this is, well, I'm going to put childish things away completely, and I'm gonna come back, and I'm gonna be on the other side, and I'm gonna be the teacher.
Right, and you sort of see echoes, because this story goes almost completely back to origin and is informed by a lot of the things that happened in the origin in the early days of Spider-Man. Which is a good thing, I think. Especially the
idea of why don't you try to make money with your spider powers?
That was one of the things I was going to talk about. That scene specifically was one of the things that I saw informing a lot of the stories here, where you had that teacher you were talking about telling him that you have to teach kids to sort of stand up for themselves and think about them as individuals being more important than everybody else, and saying, okay, I'm bigger than this guy, I'm going to stand up for myself. And that's sort of the mentality that Peter Parker had when he let the burglar go by. So Peter's sort of conflicted in letting these kids try to stand up for themselves and be like that, or to help them out completely. He wants them to learn, but he doesn't want them to become what he did and make the mistakes that he made. It's much more complicated than he would like it to be, like you said.
I found
it's a difficult position.
I found Ezekiel really fascinating. Here's a guy who has pretty much the exact same powers that Peter Parker does, and he did what Peter Parker thought about doing, where he makes his riches, he makes millions doing that, and yet he's also managed to be a really good person, and he's not like an evil corporate tycoon or anything. He puts his money in good places, and he uses it to help out a lot. And I like that the book, like we keep saying, it's about the world being more complicated. So what it does is it says that even that idea of with great power comes great responsibility, that's not the end of it. That's even too oversimplified according to JMS, because Ezekiel says, okay, with great power comes responsibility, but what's the second half of that? That can only be half of it. What comes with responsibility? It's like Peter Parker found the halfway point, and now he's got to go beyond that. And it is kind of interesting that this comes right on the heels of Peter Parker being in kind of a turning point of his life, where like Mary Jane just left him. And I think that has a lot to do with this kind of transition period, and why JMS felt the need to have this new character come in and teach Peter Parker, okay, it's time to get to the second leg of your journey.
Right, and that's hammered home at the end of this story, where Peter Parker admits to himself that he's even a little bit more complicated than everybody perceives him to be. Everybody's talking throughout the whole story about how he's this pure child of the spider, and the possibility of the powers in the spider being passed to him before the radiation hit the spider, and that's what killed it.
Yeah, which, by the way, we should talk about that, because that's the one thing I didn't like about this.
Yeah, we should. But, yeah, because that's one of the big controversial things about this book.
Yeah, sure.
But he admits to himself that that whole radiation thing was part of it, because the way he defeats Morlun is sort of in the same way that the radiation was used on him in the origin. So it's sort of like him admitting to himself, you can't really even nail down yourself into one category. Like at the end of this, basically at the beginning of the story, he doesn't really know who he really is as a powered being, I suppose.
Yeah, I liked the totem idea a lot.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I always kind of resist this idea of... I mean, I think JMS did it as well as could be expected. But I do find myself, a lot of the time as I'm reading something like this, resisting the idea of literary motifs encroaching on the narrative, which I think is really what we have here, where you take something that's always been unspoken before, that sort of permeates and is kind of interesting to look at, where you look at these trends and these parallels, and you say, okay, why is it that the X-Men always fight mutants, like they mention here? Why is it that Spider-Man is always fighting other animal-themed characters, that kind of thing? And then because JMS is trying to go to a place that hasn't been done before, he says, well, why don't we take that out and make it a real literal thing and have an actual reason for why Spider-Man seems to be always fighting animal-themed characters. And it's okay, it's interesting, but again, I do resist it to a degree also, because it's these literary motifs encroaching physically onto the narrative.
Right, and he sort of forgets that one of Spider-Man's arch enemies isn't animal-themed. In the Green Goblin and
or Venom.
There's so many of Spider-Man's rogues gallery that is animal themed, but he kind of forgets about everyone else that isn't. So, I mean,
that's a good point too.
It's a little odd to say that these villains like the Rhino and the Lizard are more intricately connected to the fabric of who Spider-Man is than the Green Goblin is.
Especially given that so many of them are just thugs that get hired by the Kingpin or someone, right?
Right.
Kingpin's not, animal themed. I mean, how do you fit that in there?
Right, exactly. And I thought, if we're going to go with this whole animal motif thing, and we're going to have a guy that hunts people who are animals, why aren't we using Kraven the Hunter?
Yeah, that's it. Well, because he's not an animal also. But yeah, I see what you're saying. And honestly, I did find myself thinking about Kraven quite a bit through this, and kind of a couple points, because you're scrutinizing this a little bit. It's a more modern Spider-Man story, and so it's hard not to think, okay, has this kind of been done before? You think about that. I don't feel like Morlun is too Kraven. I mean, I think that
he's not. I'm just saying
they're certainly very different.
We already have a hunter. We have a hunter character in the Rogues Gallery.
Yeah, and actually,
he was dead at this point, but they can bring him back later. So
I gotta say, I actually kind of liked the Morlun concept of hunting Spider-Man more than I even liked Kraven. Not that I don't like Kraven. He's not my favorite. But the thing is, I really like the idea of it's not personal. The whole concept of Morlun has to hunt him because he feeds on him, and whereas with Kraven it's just sport, and so it's a little bit hard making that guy a sympathetic character, though it's not like it's never been done. I mean, Kraven can be a lot of fun. So I mean, that's nothing against Kraven, but I like that this guy is kind of like a specific vampire. You know, he's got to feed on people, but he's got to find people that have that, like, animal thing in them from, like, I don't know, how many of those people could possibly be around? I wondered how often he had to feed, like...
He said that Spider-Man would quench his thirst for a really long time. I think it was like 1,000 years or something like that.
Oh, wow, okay. I don't remember that. That's good. I'm glad that's in there. I like the idea that Ezekiel kind of helps him a little bit, but he needs a little more than that.
I like that, too. I just thought the whole fight with Morlun was just so well done.
Oh yeah, and it's like page after page after
one
page.
Fight in these 6 issues, and it sort of goes throughout all of them.
Yeah,
and we just see Spider-Man taken down, beaten into submission until like an inch of his life. It's hard to look at, but at the same time, you can't help but look away because it's so intriguing. Spider-Man, he just won't give up. He won't give in, and he's trying all these different strategies and things, and nothing's working. And eventually, the thing that he's able to beat him with is his mind, not his physical prowess, which he had been trying to beat him with the whole time. He wasn't able to beat him with the spider powers. He was able to beat them with Peter Parker's mind. And
and that's really important because he beats him with science, and there is a lot about Peter Parker being a scientist in this, and I mean, you know, that he's going in to be the science teacher, and what makes him more than just a guy with superpowers. Whereas Ezekiel, I think, is kind of a guy with superpowers.
Right, he's a guy with superpowers trying to figure out who he wants to be, whereas Peter Parker's a guy that pretty much knows who he is, and he's transitioning to a different part of his life, and he's trying to figure out who he is as a superhero, as a person with powers. The dynamics flip between the two of them, which is what makes their dynamic so interesting.
I think JMS gives himself a lot of credibility as the new Spider-Man writer in this first arc by inventing characters right out the gate and making them interesting and compelling and people that we want to keep going with, and then only using them for that one arc.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's very easy for a writer to come in and take an established villain and do something with him, because, you know, as soon as you put the Green Goblin or Doc Ock on the front of a comic book, you're going to sell more copies than, you know, one with Morlun on the cover.
It's a good point, yeah.
You know? So it was a brave endeavor, and it paid off. I think Morlun was extremely interesting. He had the sort of Galactus, you know, he's trying to do what he needs to survive, and he just happens to need to do that at the expense of other people. That last shot at the end when he's dying and he says it wasn't anything personal, I was just hungry. It's really kind of sad.
Yeah, that is sad. Although I have to say that this is a bit of a complaint I have. That idea is really good, and yet at the same time, it seemed a little bit odd that Morlun, like, had so little affinity for human life, but still had this, like, it's not personal thing. Where, like, he would pick up people and, like I thought the most gut-wrenching panel was when he picks up that little kid by the foot, upside down. Like, I stared at that for a minute. I was like, ooh, that's rough, and things like that. But then he acts like, you know, it's not that he's evil or malicious. He just has to do this to survive. And I wondered if the thing was he sees, like, human beings as ants, but then, like, he and his prey are somehow on some other level. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Otherwise, he's entirely unsympathetic.
That's what I was sort of thinking, like, he saw his prey as a higher level of being than regular humans are because they don't have powers and are not connected to the totem or whatever. Because Ezekiel was talking a little bit about how in mythology there's those people that, like in Egyptian mythology, he had like a drawing of Horus, for example, and they were worshipped as gods. and those were people that Ezekiel. And no, not Ezekiel. Morlun would have consumed. So maybe he's looking at them like, oh, these people are worshipped as higher beings, gods by these people. Sort of how like people say superheroes are the modern myths and gods and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I really think that JMS is tapping into that here, where he's trying to connect the whole superhero pantheon to the pantheons of old. Let's go ahead and talk about the bit of the chicken and the egg with the spider versus the radiation thing. That didn't work for me at all, I gotta say.
So.
No, well, I kept kind of mulling it over when the idea was first presented, because Peter Parker kind of is blindsided by it and is thinking about it really hard. He's like, I've never thought about it like that. And I'm like, and in my head I was like, yeah, you've never thought about it like that because it doesn't make any sense. It's a spider. Like, just the idea that maybe the spider wanted to give you superpowers before it was irradiated. None of that made any sense to me.
I mean, I could see how it could happen. I mean, like, it's pretty convenient in the first place that a spider's there exactly where he is, and it happens to drop into the radiation and then happens to land on his hand and bite him, I think it's JMS sort of trying to take those, like you said, the sort of things that are in the piece that weren't explained before, just coincidences, and trying to make a realistic explanation for them. And maybe he goes a little too far. Yeah,
because the thing is, I don't think he's trying to make a realistic explanation so much
not
as
realistic, but a more believable. I mean, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah, but what I'm going to say is believable in that he's trying to make it a mythology. It's like he's making it mythos when before it was just kind of convenient. And that does seem a little bit odd to me. Like, I don't think Stan Lee would have ever gone there. I'm not saying that makes it bad. But it does seem a little bit odd. It's sort of like it's like making it a fate thing. And I always resist that with Spider-Man, where like the whole web of life idea is something I never really liked, and I feel like this is kind of part of that.
Well, I would agree with you that I wouldn't have necessarily loved the idea if they had wholesale said, this is how it is, and
okay, fair enough.
It's been like that since the beginning of time. It's sort of, Ezekiel and Morlun present this information, and then Peter sort of says at the end, there's no proof that anyone ever gave me that this is true, and he was able to beat Morlun through science. He didn't use magic or anything like these guys were talking about the whole time.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
The magic that they perceive is something that could be explained by science that they just don't understand. It could go either way.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is that JMS is a really smart writer, so he puts it in there in such a way where maybe it's really there, or maybe it's just in these people's imagination, so that guys like me won't have a harder time calling foul on it.
Exactly.
And I haven't read any more past this. So, I mean, if this is an idea that starts to really permeate this book, I won't really care for it. But if it's just this kind of conceptual thing where it's like maybe that's what it is, no, you're right. That's not so bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the way I sort of perceived it, because you know me, I love the Spider-Man origin.
All right. Well, point to Dan.
Do anything that I don't like to it, I wouldn't really have cared for. But here, I didn't think it was smart of JMS to not say it's my way or the highway. He gave us sort of some leeway there.
He gave other writers an out if they didn't want to go there.
Right, exactly. One of the things that, I mean, this is sort of a nitpick that I think, talking about the writing, that sort of bugged me. I didn't really care for the self-indulgent Babylon 5 reference that he had.
Oh, I was going to say, I thought that was hilarious.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I kind of liked that.
I didn't really care.
Because he was making fun of himself a little bit.
Yeah. But other than that, I think the artwork in here is absolutely fantastic. I think this is some of Romita's best work that I've ever seen from him. This and Man Without Fear, the series that he did with Frank Miller, I think that's some of his best work. I don't know. I think it's Scott Hanna inking him here, which is not Klaus Janson or the guy that was inking him on Avengers. I am not sure who it was in Avengers, but I know Klaus Janson inks him quite a bit of the time. But this art looks a little bit cleaner than some of his previous stuff. It's not as sketchy. It looks a little bit more defined, and the people's emotions on their faces looks a little bit more.
I thought it was pretty polished too. Yeah, I feel like there's this attempt now to make Romita look grittier and grungier. I don't know why that is, because Romita's character designs in the first place are not exactly my cup of tea. I think that it, for me, personal preference. I'm not saying that I don't like his art. I think that he's an amazing artist. I'm just saying that personal preference for me, I think a lot of the time it's a little bit too cartoony. But I didn't get that as much here. I'm thinking that more with, like you said, with like more recent Avengers stuff. Because looking at this, every now and again, somebody would have a face where I didn't like that it was like so square and stuff. But beyond that, nobody does action like Romita does action.
Oh no.
And where you don't want Romita is a book like Avengers with 25 guys standing around talking to each other in every panel. And what you have here is not that, and so like the action, JMS gives him so much to do in those fight scenes where he's fighting this guy that he's been told over and over by Ezekiel, you're going to die if you fight him. And when you have Spider-Man up against a guy who he will die if he fights him, Romita's the guy for that.
Right, exactly. I think JMS played completely and utterly to Romita's strengths here, because I think what you were saying about Avengers before, a lot of people try to use Romita Jr. like they do his dad. Romita Sr. is perfect for people standing around having conversations because he has such a clean and crisp and classic-looking style. Everybody looks very polished and very proper-looking. And Romita Jr. is very derivative of Jack Kirby. Everybody's square and muscular and looks like they're gonna, punch someone out in the next second. It's very action oriented, and it's ironic that he looks more like Kirby than his dad. But
yeah, that's funny. Well, I think part of the reason that I like it more with Kirby is that Kirby, at least most of the Kirby stuff I've read, he seems to do more cosmic stuff, and it works better there. When you put it with street level stuff, I don't care for it as much.
Right. Yeah. That's sort of telling. Spider-Man, Kirby was going to draw it, and Stanley told him not to.
Yeah,
it did go instead.
And then we've got the guy channeling Kirby drawing it, but it's still really. I'm with you. It's still really good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed, especially the way he drew Aunt May. I thought she was really consistent with just a lot of different artists' takes on her. I thought it was sort of a nice amalgam of Aunt May as drawn over the years, and it was a more modern take on her, too. She looked a little bit more not as ancient in here, not as, 126 years old.
Oh, and how great is this cliffhanger, too, where, you completely buy that this is the moment Aunt May walks in on him and finds out he's Spider-Man.
Yeah. Well, when I was reading this for the first time, I threw the book down. I was like, my mind is blown, Because
cool.
That's not something that we had ever seen before at the time. And
again, I think that's part of him trying to prove that there's more stuff to do with it.
Right, exactly. JMS just does a great job here of finding new places to challenge Peter Parker in ways that further his character. And that's the core of what I love about Spider-Man. Every conflict that he would have in the old stories would get him to a different place by the end, and we have that here. He's not stagnating. We're not having something that's a rehash of the previous status quo. We're moving forward. I just really like everything about this. I think it's great.
Well, everybody, thanks as always for watching the Comic Book Vault, and if there's anything you'd ever like to send to the Vault, you can always send that to our P.O. Box. That's Geekvolution, P.O. Box 14183, Lenexa, Kansas 66285, and Vince and I will get to more stuff that's been sent to the Vault as soon as humanly possible. Next time, Dan and I are going to do some more Simonson Thor, and in the meantime, thanks a lot for watching. Dan, thanks as always for being on with me. Appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you later. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
See you later.